The twin moons of Nexus Prime gleamed like cold sentinels over the vast, barren landscape of the ruined colony world. Lady Elowen Starfire, a highborn of the Aurelian Empire, stood at the viewport of the command deck, her golden eyes narrowed in barely concealed disdain. It was here, on this forsaken wasteland, that she had been ordered to recover a lost artifact of ancient significance, a relic of the old world, a fragment of Aurelian history lost in the chaotic wars between their people and the lesser races. And her assigned partner for this mission was none other than Commander Tristan Hale, a human. A human. Elowen's fingers curled into the fine silk of her cloak. The very idea of working alongside one of them, an unremarkable species devoid of noble lineage, without the fire of the Aurelian blood, was insulting. Humans were crude, unpredictable, and worst of all, fragile. Yet the Imperial High Council had made it clear. Tristan was the best tracker in the quadrant, and the relic's last known coordinates placed it deep within the dangerous underbelly of Nexus Prime. The mission was paramount, and success meant elevating her standing among the elite. She had no choice but to endure his presence. The doors to the command deck hissed open, and she turned as Commander Hale entered, his heavy boots echoing against the polished floor. He was tall for a human, broad-shouldered and battle-worn, his uniform marked with the insignia of the Terran Vanguard, a force of mercenaries, spies, and soldiers who served wherever the credits led them. Tristan studied her with a quiet smirk, his deep-set green eyes gleaming with something that unsettled her. "I was told I'd be working with an Aurelian noble," he said, his voice carrying the rough edge of a man who had seen too many battles. "Didn't expect a princess." Elowen stiffened. "I am not a princess," she snapped, her voice sharp as a blade. "I am a Starfire, of the ruling bloodline. I suggest you remember that, human." He chuckled, unfazed. "Oh, I'll remember." Their descent onto Nexus Prime was turbulent. The planet's atmosphere, still unstable from past wars, sent violent storms spiraling across the ruined cities. The capital, Ophiant's Rest, had once been a beacon of civilization. Now, it was little more than crumbling spires and shattered domes, remnants of a forgotten age. Tristan adjusted his tactical rifle as they stepped off the shuttle. "This place is a graveyard." Elowen lifted her chin. "And yet, even in death, it holds more worth than your people's entire history." Tristan let out a low whistle. "You really don't like humans, do you? I find them inferior." He chuckled again, shaking his head. "Well, this is going to be fun." Their destination lay deep within the ruins, beneath the catacombs of the old Aurelian temple. Reports indicated that a powerful artifact had been sealed away there, lost when Nexus Prime fell into chaos centuries ago. But they were not alone. The moment they stepped into the subterranean tunnels, movement flickered in the darkness. Rythan marauders, a band of scavengers, pirates, and genetic outcasts, had also caught wind of the artifact's value, and they were willing to kill for it. Blaster fire erupted. Elowen moved like a striking serpent, her plasma blades igniting in a dance of violet energy. She cut through the marauders with an elegance that was almost artistic, swift, deadly, precise. Tristan, in contrast, was brute efficiency. His rifle roared, taking down enemies with methodical precision. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. By the time the last marauder fell, silence returned to the ruins. Elowen turned to Tristan, brushing an errant strand of silver hair from her face. "You fight well. For a human." Tristan smirked, reloading his weapon. "And you're not bad. For royalty." For the first time, she found herself almost amused. Almost. The artifact lay within the heart of the ruins, encased in an ancient Aurelian vault. As Elowen activated the biometric locks, the chamber filled with a pulsing golden light. The relic, a crystalline sphere, radiating power, floated in the air, waiting. But as she reached for it, something strange happened. A surge of energy pulsed through the chamber, knocking both of them back. Visions flashed before their eyes, of ancient Aurelians and humans standing together, not as enemies, but as one people. A forgotten history, buried beneath centuries of deception and war. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the visions faded. Elowen's breath was unsteady. "That was impossible," Tristan finished, his expression dark. "Your people erased this history." She wanted to deny it. wanted to hold on to the belief that Aurelians had always been superior. But deep down, doubt had already begun to take root. Something had been hidden from them, and this artifact held the key to the truth. That night, as they camped beneath the ruined sky, the tension between them became something else. Something dangerous. A fire had been lit in Elowen's veins, one that she had spent years suppressing, an attraction she refused to acknowledge, a pull that defied logic. And for one reckless night, she surrendered to it. Weeks later, aboard the Aurelian warship, Elowen stood before a medic, her mind spinning. "Lady Starfire," the physician said carefully, "the tests are conclusive. You are with child." She felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not possible." The medic hesitated. "And yet it is. The child is a hybrid. A union between human and Aurelian should have been impossible. The genetic barriers had always been absolute. But now, within her, something new had been created, something that should not exist. And she knew, without a doubt, that the High Council would never allow it to live. Lady Elowen Starfire sat rigid in her quarters aboard the Imperial warship Volition, her mind a storm of conflict. The revelation of her pregnancy had shattered every certainty she had clung to, every belief in the purity of Aurelian blood, in the supposed superiority of her people over the lesser races. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, where the impossible life grew within her. A child of two worlds. A living contradiction. A threat. The High Council could never know. A sharp chime at the door startled her. She took a steadying breath before answering. "Enter." The door slid open, revealing Commander Tristan Hale. "Figured you'd be avoiding me," he said, stepping inside, his arms crossed. His keen green eyes searched her face. "You've been acting strange since we left Nexus Prime." Elowen stiffened. Tristan was sharp, far sharper than most humans she had encountered. He could sense something was wrong. "I have much to consider," she said carefully. Tristan studied her for a long moment. "You saw the same thing I did in those ruins. The truth about our peoples, about what was erased." Her fingers curled into the fabric of her robe. "If that truth is revealed, it will not be welcomed." "No," he admitted, "but it changes everything." A silence stretched between them. Elowen hesitated. A part of her wanted to tell him, to unburden herself from the terrible truth growing inside her. But if she did, she would be placing him in the same danger she now faced. She could not afford weakness. "Not now. This conversation is over," she said coolly. "Return to your quarters, Commander." Tristan's jaw tightened, but he nodded once and left without another word. As the door sealed shut behind him, Elowen exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. She was on borrowed time. Days later, the Imperial warship Volition arrived at the Aurelian capital world, Celestra, a world of crystalline towers and shimmering spires, home to the Empire's ruling elite. Elowen had barely stepped off the docking ramp when she was intercepted by a familiar figure. Lord Elowen Starfire, her elder brother. "Elowen," he greeted smoothly, though his golden eyes were sharp with suspicion. "You have been difficult to reach." She inclined her head in acknowledgement. "I have been occupied with my mission." Valen's gaze flickered over her. "And yet, there are whispers that you returned from Nexus Prime changed." Her pulse quickened. Had the High Council already heard rumors? "Whispers are for the weak," she said evenly. "I am a Starfire. My loyalty remains with the Empire." Valen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Of course. But as she walked past him, she knew he was watching her. 2 days later, Elowen was summoned to the Aurelian High Council, a grand assembly of the most powerful nobles in the Empire. The chamber was a vast hall of light and shadow, where towering figures sat upon elevated thrones of silver and gold. The Imperator, supreme ruler of the Aurelians, presided over the gathering. Elowen stood in the center, her posture rigid. The first chancellor, an elder with skin like burnished steel, spoke first. "Lady Starfire, you have returned from Nexus Prime with the artifact we sought." She inclined her head. "Yes, Chancellor. The relic has been secured." And yet, another counselor interjected. "You return with something else as well." A shiver ran down her spine. "We have reason to believe you carry an aberration," the Chancellor continued, his voice laced with quiet menace. Elowen's breath caught. They knew. Her fingers curled into fists. "Who dares accuse me of such?" "The medical records from your ship were intercepted," the Imperator said, his golden eyes gleaming with cold authority. It is true, then? She could lie. She could deny it, claim it was false. But what would it change? The truth had already been uncovered. Slowly, she lifted her chin. It is true. I carry a child. A hybrid. A murmur rippled through the chamber, some voices sharp with outrage, others hushed with shock. You have tainted the Starfire line, Valen's voice rang out, filled with venomous certainty. This abomination cannot be allowed to exist. Elowen's heart pounded. She had expected resistance, but to hear her own blood condemn her so readily, it was a different kind of wound. The Imperator's voice was final. The child must be purged. Silence. Cold and absolute. Elowen's breath trembled in her chest. They would take her child from her. No, not while she still drew breath. That night, Elowen moved with silent precision through the halls of the palace. She had spent her life here, knew every hidden passage, every unseen corridor. She reached a secure terminal and transmitted a coded message. Minutes later, Tristan's voice crackled through the hidden communicator. Elowen. His voice was tense. What's going on? She took a steadying breath. They know. A sharp curse. Tell me where you are. She hesitated. This was madness. To trust a human, to abandon everything she had ever known, for a child that should not exist. And yet, she whispered her coordinates. Minutes later, a stolen transport ship soared through the capital's sky, its thrusters burning like a comet fleeing the gods. Inside, Elowen sat beside Tristan in the cockpit, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. You really think we can outrun an empire? He asked. She placed a hand over her abdomen, feeling the pulse of life within. We don't have a choice, she said. And as the stars stretched before them, she knew this was only the beginning. That night, Elowen moved with silent precision through the halls of the palace. She had spent her life here, knew every hidden passage, every unseen corridor. She reached a secure terminal and transmitted a coded message. Minutes later, Tristan's voice crackled through the hidden communicator. Elowen. His voice was tense. What's going on? She took a steadying breath. They know. A sharp curse. Tell me where you are. She hesitated. This was madness. To trust a human, to abandon everything she had ever known, for a child that should not exist. And yet, she whispered her coordinates. Minutes later, a stolen transport ship soared through the capital's sky, its thrusters burning like a comet fleeing the gods. Inside, Elowen sat beside Tristan in the cockpit, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. You really think we can outrun an empire? He asked. She placed a hand over her abdomen, feeling the pulse of life within. We don't have a choice, she said. And as the stars stretched before them, she knew this was only the beginning. That night, Elowen moved with silent precision through the halls of the palace. She had spent her life here, knew every hidden passage, every unseen corridor. She reached a secure terminal and transmitted a coded message. Minutes later, Tristan's voice crackled through the hidden communicator. Elowen. His voice was tense. What's going on? She took a steadying breath. They know. A sharp curse. Tell me where you are. She hesitated. This was madness. To trust a human, to abandon everything she had ever known, for a child that should not exist. And yet, she whispered her coordinates. Minutes later, a stolen transport ship soared through the capital's sky, its thrusters burning like a comet fleeing the gods. Inside, Elowen sat beside Tristan in the cockpit, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. You really think we can outrun an empire? He asked. She placed a hand over her abdomen, feeling the pulse of life within. We don't have a choice, she said. And as the stars stretched before them, she knew this was only the beginning. The human colony world of Ravik 9 was a stark contrast to Celestra. Where the Aurelian capital had been a place of pristine order, Ravik 9 was a world of chaos and survival. A frontier planet at the edge of the known systems, where exiles, mercenaries, and traders carved out existence among the dust-covered cities. The ship landed at the outskirts of New Luthor, a sprawling settlement built from repurposed starship hulls and crumbling pre-war structures. Tristan led the way, moving with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in places like this. Elowen followed, her noble robes exchanged for a simple cloak, her silver hair hidden beneath a hood. As they walked through the crowded streets, She felt the weight of a world that did not care for lineage or bloodlines. Here, people did not bow to nobility. They bowed to survival. Tristan glanced at her. Second thoughts. Elowen exhaled. No, but I do not belong here. Maybe not, he admitted, but neither do I. That's the beauty of it. They reached a small outpost near the settlement's edge, a rundown medical clinic operated by an old war medic named Dr. Saul Rannick, an old friend of Tristan's. The aging doctor squinted at them as they entered. Hale, what in the hells did you get yourself into this time? Tristan smirked. Oh, just the usual. Treason, intergalactic pursuit, impossible pregnancies. Saul's gaze flickered to Elowen, then to her abdomen. His brows lifted. Well, he muttered, rubbing his stubbled chin. This is a first. Days passed. The child grew, faster than any normal pregnancy should allow. Dr. Rannick was baffled. The genetic makeup is unlike anything I've seen. Elowen felt it, too. The energy pulsing beneath her skin, the way her body adapted, evolved. Then, one night, it happened. Pain seized her. A burning fire that spread through her veins like an electric storm. Tristan was at her side in an instant. Elowen, her vision blurred. The world tilted. And then, a burst of golden light erupted from her skin. Tristan staggered back. The entire room trembled. The lights flickered. The medical monitors overloaded and shorted out. Elowen gasped, collapsing into Tristan's arms. And then, silence. Saul stared. By the gods. Tristan's grip tightened around her. What the hell was that? Elowen's breath shuddered. I don't know, she whispered. But deep inside, she understood. This child was not just a hybrid. It was something more. Something that should not exist. And the universe would not allow it to go unnoticed. The silence after the explosion of light was deafening. The air crackled with the last remnants of energy, the medical equipment in the clinic now nothing more than sparking ruins. Tristan still held Elowen against him, his heartbeat a steady rhythm beneath her cheek. But Elowen could barely focus. Her body thrummed with something new, something unstable. Dr. Rannick was the first to break the silence. Well, he muttered, running a hand over his face. I've seen some wild things in my time, but that takes the damn prize. Elowen forced herself to sit up, though every muscle in her body screamed in protest. What happened? Tristan studied her, his green eyes sharp with something between concern and awe. You tell me. She swallowed, trying to calm the fire still surging in her veins. I don't know. It felt like something inside me unlocked. Saul grunted. Unlocked. Hell, you just fried my entire clinic. Whatever's growing in you, it's not normal. Elowen turned her gaze to the darkened medical screens, the broken scanners. The child inside her was changing her. It was rewriting her physiology, breaking the rules of what should be possible. She met Tristan's gaze. This child is more than a hybrid. He nodded slowly. Yeah, no kidding. But before they could process what this meant, a new sound cut through the ruined clinic. A proximity alarm. Saul cursed, moving to the cracked window and peering out. His face darkened. We've got company. Tristan was at the window in an instant. Through the dust-choked streets of New Luthor, a group of armored figures moved in formation, Aurelian Inquisitors. Elowen's breath caught. The High Council had found them. Tristan swore under his breath. Damn it. We weren't careful enough. Elowen's mind raced. If they had been tracked this quickly, it meant one thing. Valen. Her brother had betrayed her, just as she had known he would. She turned to Saul. Is there another way out? Saul grunted. Back in trance. Leads into the Undercity tunnels. But if they have trackers, we won't stay hidden for long. Elowen glanced at Tristan. We need a ship. Way ahead of you. He was already moving, checking his weapons. We get to the landing bays, steal something fast, and get the hell off this rock. Elowen forced herself to stand, steadying herself against the surge of energy still coursing through her body. They had minutes before the Inquisitors reached them. Then the first explosion hit. The front of the clinic detonated in a storm of plasma fire. The shockwave knocked them backward, flames licking at the crumbling walls. The Inquisitors were not here to negotiate. Move, Tristan barked, grabbing Elowen's hand and pulling her toward the back exit. Saul was already ahead, leading them into the darkness of the Undercity tunnels. The air was thick with smoke, the sounds of boots and shouted orders echoing behind them. They were being hunted. Elowen's pulse thundered. She had fought in battles before, had wielded plasma blades in the name of her people. But this was different. This time, it was her own people hunting her. The tunnels twisted through the underground, narrow passageways built centuries ago during the first human settlements. They emerged into an old industrial sector near the landing bays, the air thick with the scent of burning fuel and machinery. Tristan checked their surroundings. There, old cargo freighter, unguarded. Saul cursed. That thing's a relic. It won't outrun an Imperial ship. It doesn't have to, Tristan said, already moving. Just needs to get us to someone who can help. They ran for the ship. Behind them, the Inquisitors breached the sector, their voices sharp with orders. Find the traitor. Take the hybrid alive. Elowen's breath caught. They weren't here just to kill her. They wanted the child. That realization sent a bolt of cold terror through her. They knew. The ship's engines roared to life as Tristan powered it up. Elowen took the co-pilot's seat, fingers dancing over the unfamiliar human controls. Blaster fire rained down from the approaching troops. But then, the power surged within her again. Without thinking, she reached out. Not with her hands, but with something deeper. The ship's failing shields reactivated instantly. The control panels flared back to life. Tristan turned to her, eyes wide. Did you just? The ship lifted off, faster than it should have been able to move. The fire in Elowen's veins pulsed again, and suddenly she understood. The child was not just unlocking something in her. It was awakening something in both their species. The ship blasted into the sky, breaking through the upper atmosphere. The moment they cleared the gravity well, Tristan punched in the hyperdrive coordinates. Where are we going? Elowen asked. Tristan hesitated. Then he said, there's someone who might know what's happening to you. What's happening to that child? Saul snorted. Let me guess, more trouble? Tristan smirked. Only the worst kind. Elowen turned her gaze to the endless stars ahead. She had once believed strength was born from purity, from bloodlines. But the child inside her was proving her wrong. And she had the feeling the entire galaxy was about to find out just how wrong they had all been. The stolen freighter hurtled through hyperspace, its worn-out hull groaning under the strain of speeds it was never built to handle. Inside the cramped cockpit, Elowen Starfire sat in silence, one hand resting over her abdomen, the other gripping the armrest as a strange energy still pulsed beneath her skin. The child inside her was changing everything. Across from her, Tristan Hale studied the navigation panel. The soft glow of the starlines reflected in his green eyes as he adjusted their course. Elowen, he said at last, his tone measured. There's something you're not telling me. She stiffened. What do you mean? Tristan leaned back, crossing his arms. That thing back on Ravik 9? The way the ship reacted? That wasn't just some pregnancy side effect. He hesitated, then added, You're different. Elowen swallowed hard. She could not deny it. Since leaving the Aurelian capital, her body had evolved. Faster reflexes, heightened senses, and, most disturbingly, a strange connection to the very energy around her. Machines responded to her touch. Her heartbeat synced with the pulse of power sources. The realization unsettled her. I don't know what's happening to me, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Tristan watched her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we better find someone who does. The destination he had plotted was a remote world on the fringes of known space. HFY, a storm-ravaged planet home to smugglers, outcasts, and those who had long since abandoned the rule of any empire. And more importantly, it was home to someone who might hold answers. An old contact of Tristan's, a rogue scientist, a man named Aurelian Empire. The ship dropped out of hyperspace above HFY, its surface shrouded in swirling storms. The planet was a wasteland of jagged cliffs and roving lightning, its cities hidden beneath protective domes that pulsed with artificial light. Tristan set them down in a small smuggler's outpost, a settlement carved into the side of a canyon, its structures haphazardly stacked like broken starships welded together. As they stepped off the freighter, Elowen pulled her hood up, concealing her silver hair. The Aurelian High Council had spies everywhere. If she was recognized, this fragile refuge would be short-lived. Saul grunted as he took in the decrepit surroundings. Hell of a place to hide out. Tristan smirked. That's why it works. They made their way through the winding alleyways, passing traders peddling stolen Imperial tech, mercenaries nursing their wounds in shadowed bars, and bounty hunters scanning the crowds for their next prize. And finally, they reached a rusted-out research station, its doors locked with security mechanisms far more advanced than anything else in the settlement. Tristan knocked once, twice, then leaned in and said, "Open the damn door, Orion, before I sell your coordinates to the Writhen Syndicate." A pause. Then, with a loud hiss, the door slid open. Standing in the entrance was Aurelian Vale, a man who should have been dead. Elowen had heard of him. A brilliant geneticist who had vanished decades ago after conducting forbidden experiments on Aurelian and human DNA. He had been hunted by both sides. Now here he stood. He was tall and wiry, his once pristine lab coat now little more than tattered fabric. His eyes, a piercing gray, flickered between them before settling on Elowen. Then, without warning, he laughed. "Oh," he murmured, shaking his head. "This is interesting." Inside Orion's lab, the air was thick with the scent of burning circuits and old machinery. Screens flickered with strange data streams, and a central workstation displayed genetic sequences unlike anything Elowen had ever seen. She sat on an old medical chair as Orion scanned her, analyzed her, studied her. Finally, he leaned back, expression unreadable. "Fascinating," he murmured. Elowen's patience was running thin. "Tell me what you found." Orion tapped the screen. "Your child isn't just a hybrid, Lady Starfire." He turned to face her. "It's the missing link." Silence. Tristan frowned. "Missing link." Orion smirked. "Let me explain something very few people know. Humans and Aurelians? We were never supposed to be separate species. Once, thousands of years ago, we were one." Elowen's breath caught. Orion continued, his voice growing sharper. "The Aurelian High Council built an empire on the lie of purity. But the truth? Your divine lineage is just a fragmented version of what humans lost. You are two halves of the same ancient race, split apart by forced evolution." Elowen's heart pounded. "You're saying that your child is a restoration of something long thought extinct?" Tristan exhaled. "That explains why the High Council is hunting you. They don't just want to kill the child. They want to control it." Orion's gaze darkened. "No, they want to erase it. Because if this gets out, their rule, their entire foundation of power, crumbles." Elowen's fingers curled into fists. She had spent her entire life believing in the superiority of her people. But now, everything she had ever known had been a lie. And then, a warning klaxon blared. Orion's face twisted in horror. He turned to his monitors. "They found us." Outside the research station, the air shimmered with the arrival of Aurelian hunters, elites dressed in midnight armor, their plasma rifles glowing with charged energy. The High Council was not taking chances. They had sent Elowen Starfire himself. Elowen's breath caught as her brother stepped forward, his golden eyes cold, merciless. "This ends tonight, sister." His voice carried through the air like a blade. "Come willingly, and your death will be swift." Tristan tensed beside her. Saul muttered a curse. Orion grabbed a weapon from his desk. Elowen clenched her jaw. She had run long enough. The child inside her stirred, a pulse of energy rippling through her blood. She took a deep breath. And then, for the first time, she stopped resisting it. Outside, the air shifted. The ground trembled. And as Elowen stepped forward, power crackling at her fingertips, Valen took a step back. He was afraid. For the first time in her life, Elowen understood. She was no longer bound by bloodlines. She was something new. And the Aurelian Empire was not ready for what she had become. The air between Elowen Starfire and Valen shimmered with unseen energy. The very planet seemed to pulse beneath her feet, attuned to the strange, new force running through her blood. This was no longer just a battle for survival. This was a war for the future. Valen stood poised, a high-ranking executioner of the Aurelian High Council, his midnight armor gleaming under the storm-lit sky of Eshar 4. He was not just here to end her life. He was here to erase the proof of their shared, hidden ancestry. Behind him, Aurelian hunters fanned out in a precise formation, weapons trained on Elowen and her allies. They were patient, disciplined. They did not fear Tristan. They did not fear Saul. But they feared her. Elowen, Valen's voice was steady, controlled, but there was something beneath it, hesitation. "You have been poisoned by the lies of a dead man and the filth of a lesser species. Surrender the aberration you carry, and you will be granted mercy." Tristan let out a sharp laugh, stepping forward with his rifle raised. "You've got a real messed up definition of mercy, Starfire." Valen didn't even spare him a glance. His focus was on her. "Elowen," he said again, more insistent. "Do not do this." She should have been afraid. She should have bent her knee and begged for clemency, as any good Aurelian noblewoman would have in the face of absolute power. But the child inside her pulsed with warmth. And for the first time in her life, she felt unbreakable. "No," she said, her voice steady. Valen's gaze flickered. "Then you leave me no choice." He lifted his hand in a precise motion. "Kill them all." The first shots rang out in unison, an overwhelming cascade of Aurelian plasma fire meant to incinerate them on the spot. But Elowen didn't move. She didn't have to. As the blasts neared, the strange power inside her reacted. A pulse of golden energy exploded outward, catching the incoming fire in a barrier of raw force. The plasma curved mid-air, twisting like liquid, then reversed course, slamming back into the Aurelian soldiers with devastating force. The battlefield went silent. Even Valen staggered back, his usual composure faltering for the first time in his life. "What," he breathed, "have you become?" Elowen didn't have an answer. But she knew what she was no longer. No longer bound by Aurelian laws. No longer confined by the shackles of lineage. No longer afraid. She stepped forward. The hunters hesitated. For the first time, they did not rush to obey their orders. Tristan whistled under his breath. "Okay. I'm impressed." Saul, still gripping his weapon, let out a low curse. "Impressed? I'm reconsidering my entire worldview." Aurelian Vale, who had been watching in stunned fascination, exhaled sharply. "Elowen, I think you're rewriting the rules of biology as we speak." She barely heard them. Her focus was on Valen, who had finally drawn his twin plasma blades, the glowing hilts extending into twin arcs of white-hot energy. Aurelian nobility did not yield, not even to the impossible. Valen charged. Elowen met his strike without thought, without hesitation. As his plasma blades descended toward her, the strange golden power surged through her veins, and before she even understood what she was doing, her hands caught the blades mid-air. There was no pain, no searing heat. The plasma energy bent around her fingers, as if it recognized her as something beyond its reach. Valen's expression twisted in shock. Impossible. She clenched her fists, and his weapons shattered. The blades, crafted from the finest Aurelian forges, weapons that had ended countless lives, crumbled into dust. A ripple of disbelief spread through the Aurelian hunters. Their leader had never been defeated. Valen stumbled back, looking at her with something he had never felt before, true fear. "You are no Aurelian," he whispered. Elowen stepped forward, feeling the energy hum through her body like a second heartbeat. "No," she said. "I'm something more." Valen's eyes flickered to the soldiers behind him, Aurelians who had spent their lives believing in their bloodline's superiority. But now they watched her with uncertainty, doubt, and for a single, fragile moment, the power of the Aurelian Empire wavered. Then, an explosion rocked the canyon. Elowen turned sharply as a new fleet of ships descended from the storm-heavy sky, Imperial warships. The High Council had not just sent Valen. They had sent an entire purge fleet. Tristan swore, "We need to get out of here. Now." Valen's expression hardened. "This is over." But Elowen knew better. She could feel the way the Aurelians behind him were watching her differently now. Some still clutched their weapons, but others hesitated. The purity doctrine had been drilled into them since birth. But she had done something they could not explain. And if one truth had already been a lie, how many more would fall? She lifted her gaze to her brother one last time. "You were wrong, Valen." His jaw clenched. "I will never accept this." "I know." She exhaled. "And that is why you have already lost." Then, before he could react, she unleashed the full force of the energy within her. Golden light exploded outward, blinding the battlefield, shaking the very ground beneath them. The shockwave sent the warships spiraling off course, disrupted tracking systems, fried the targeting locks of every pursuing vessel. The energy opened a path, a single path of escape. Tristan seized the opportunity. "Move." Aurelian, Saul, and Tristan dragged her toward the freighter. As they boarded, Elowen looked back one final time. Elowen Starfire did not follow. He stood frozen, staring at the impossible. And then, they were gone. As the freighter soared into hyperspace, Elowen collapsed into the co-pilot's chair, her heart still pounding. She turned to Aurelian. "Tell me the truth. What have I become?" Aurelian studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "You are not just an Aurelian. You are not just human. You are something new." Elowen exhaled. The Empire would never stop hunting her. But it no longer mattered. Because for the first time in history, bloodlines did not define destiny. She did. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The stolen freighter surged through hyperspace, its worn-out hull rattling as it hurtled toward the unknown. Elowen Starfire sat in silence, staring at the endless void ahead. She had won a battle, but not the war. The Aurelian High Council would never stop hunting her. Not while she lived. Not while the child inside her existed. Across the cockpit, Tristan Hale watched her carefully, as if waiting for her to break the silence. "You okay?" Elowen exhaled, pressing a hand to her abdomen. "No." He nodded. "Good. Means you still give a damn." She let out a sharp breath that almost resembled a laugh. Despite everything, despite being branded a traitor, despite the impossible war now before them, he still found a way to keep her standing. But the time for running was over. "We need to strike first," she said, lifting her gaze. "Before the Empire regains control. Before they erase the truth." Saul grunted from behind them. "You planning on taking on the entire High Council with one rusty freighter and a smuggler's paycheck?" "No," she said, turning to Orion Vale. "I'm planning on bringing the Empire to its knees." The rogue scientist raised a brow. "I do like a woman with ambition." The first transmission went out days later, a single encrypted message broadcast to hidden rebel cells, exiled warriors, and disillusioned Aurelian commanders across the outer systems. "The High Council has lied to us all. The truth of our origins has been buried in blood and war. But no more. The time for obedience is over." The response was swift. Across the Empire, something shifted. Some still clung to the purity doctrine, to the belief that Aurelians were superior. But others, many others, began to question. The Starborn War had begun. In the heart of the Aurelian capital, Elowen Starfire stood before the High Council, his fists clenched at his sides. "She escaped," the Imperator murmured. "And you failed to bring her back." Elowen did not speak. He had seen what Elowen had become, had felt the power radiating from her, seen the way the soldiers hesitated in her presence. And for the first time in his life, he was unsure. "She is a threat," another counselor snapped. "She carries a child that should not exist. If that abomination is allowed to live, our entire dominion will collapse." Elowen lifted his gaze. And perhaps it should. The thought was dangerous. The thought was treason. But it had already taken root. For the first time, Elowen wondered if he had spent his entire life fighting for a lie. Months passed. The rebellion spread. The High Council tightened its grip, sending legions to crush the uprising, to silence the truth. But they could not stop it. Because Elowen's child was born. She cradled the newborn in her arms, staring down at Aurora Starfire Hale, the first of her kind. Not human. Not Aurelian. Something new. Something stronger. She glanced at Tristan, who looked down at his daughter with quiet awe. "She's going to change everything," he murmured. Elowen nodded. "She already has." The final battle came not in a glorious clash of fleets, but in a single moment of truth. The High Council stood before the people of Celestra, their lies unraveling before them. And when the people turned against their rulers, the Empire collapsed under the weight of its own deception. Elowen Starfire was the last to fall. His loyalty had wavered, but in the end, he had chosen the old ways, and the old ways had no place in the new world. As he fell to his knees before his sister, defeated, he whispered, "I was wrong." And Elowen, standing above him, whispered back, "I know." Epilogue, The New Dawn. Years later, in the heart of a new republic, Aurora Starfire Hale took her first steps. She laughed, and the stars trembled. Her very existence had rewritten history. The future no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to her, and the galaxy would never be the same again.